Last night, I heard a little boy beg his mom not to go into a liquor store. Reddit, what things have you overheard that have broken your heart? I was at the local casino around 15 years ago and they were dragging a woman out for causing a disturbance. She was yelling he is spending our rent money. Apparently he was at the table and wouldn't stop playing and she was trying to interrupt it. Made me super sad. I think the real sadness here is that the manager would still allow someone to play after this. I overheard a maintenance worker in my apartment arguing with his drunk wife one night. Her son, his stepson, about 5 years old, yelled, "I hate you, you're not my dad." Pretty sure the guy started crying afterwards. He's such a nice guy too. In line at Taco Bell, I was irritated at how long this woman and her kid were taking, until I found out what was going on. She was counting freaking pennies. The kid said, "It's okay mom, we don't need the food items," and I swear to God I thought I was on the set of a live Charles Dickens story. You could see they didn't have much. The mom looked malnourished, both skinny. I went up to the counter and said, "No, how much is it? It's a holiday gift from your neighbor," and the lady tried to refuse but I said no. This wasn't some huge charity on my part, not trying to get karma for that. It was only like $3 or $4 more bucks. I paid the amount more that she needed and she thanked me. It didn't make me really feel much better. All I could think about what are they going to do for fricking breakfast? I was fired from my first job as a bag boy in a very mixed income grocery store for paying for a woman's groceries when she didn't have enough. And again for donating the old food that was going to be thrown away, day-old bread and whatnot, at a bakery I work at. A friend of mine got drunk at a barbecue. Kids and husband were there too. When it was explained to her that someone would drive her home, she went ballistic. I hurried her kids into my car. Didn't have keys, just didn't want them to hear the cursing, ranting awfulness spewing from their mother. Her oldest son asked me what was wrong with her, and I explained mommy just drank too much bad stuff and it has made her sick. She's just sick right now, but she will feel better later, he said. Oh, she's drunk again. I felt so horrible. Her youngest was crying, and she kept asking me how much longer until mommy feels better. I didn't know what to say. I hated everything about that night. My daughter is just over 1 year old and we send her to an in-home daycare during the week. While we're at work, there is another little girl in daycare with her who has a physical handicap having to do with her legs. Her parents drop her off with a wheelchair and leg braces for assisted walking. She's an adorable little girl, always happy, and during normal playtime hours at daycare she gets around by doing a mix of crawling and pulling herself around the room on the floor. One morning, a few weeks ago, I dropped my daughter off and I was talking to the woman who runs the daycare about how my daughter was starting to walk. The other little girl overheard me and she immediately turned and said, "No, I want Lily to stay on the floor with me." Broke my heart. Oh my gosh. Posted this before but I'll tell it again. I saw a little girl order something off a menu at a restaurant in Florida. When she was done ordering, her mom said, "You really messed up again. I trusted you this time. You wanna get that tummy tuck surgery when you're 20? What's the matter with you? Waiter, give us a few more minutes." My daughter was confused. The little girl was not that overweight, had to be around 10 years old, and was now crying hysterically. The mother kept yelling at her to stop embarrassing her and making a scene. I'm a dude, was about 22 at the time, and actually considered the consequences of smacking her in the face. Not exactly overheard, but last week I was chilling out at a buddy's house. At around midnight, a bunch of cop cars and an ambulance show up to his neighbor's house. We notice the cops are talking to the little boy who lives there. We know the boy pretty well. He is a good friend of my buddy's son. We're going to call him Martin and he is about 7. After the police leave, Martin is sitting outside and we call him over to see if everything is okay. Martin's grandpa lives with him, so we assume something happened with him because of the ambulance. But as soon as we say, "Hey Martin, what was going on there?" he instantly yells, "Nobody hit Emmy. My daddy doesn't hit Emmy." It made us so sad. That's really sad. I used to do social work with kids that have been abused and neglected. Parents will threaten their kids. They tell them people will take them away to a bad place, a stranger's house, if they tell anybody about being hit, beaten. They warn them not to talk to anyone about it, including teachers and child protective services. Very sad. In high school, I worked at a grocery store and had to work in dairy for a day, which meant I was filling shelves from behind in a large ice box all day. People couldn't see me. I heard this child chattering, and I was passively listening. She then asked mommy, "When is daddy coming home?" The mother hesitated and said, "We talked about this already." The girl got really quiet. I like to believe he was on a trip. I don't know about immediately heartbreaking, but a woman came into the pawn shop where I work. She was a regular for around 3 years. She hadn't been back in a few weeks, so I was surprised when I saw her, but she needed a very large loan. Turns out she had hired a babysitter so that she could go downtown with her friends, and she didn't trust the sitter. So she took the cash that she had in her drawer for rent bills, food for her 2 small children in case the sitter went looking through her stuff. At first I thought it was a silly thing to do, let alone having that much cash on you, but I'm used to these people not having bank accounts. Turns out it was an excuse. She took the money downtown and gambled away every last cent on VLT machines. She laughed about it. I told her that it was very serious, and she laughed it off and said, "Yeah, it's kind of an addiction. But what are you going to do?" The worst part was when she tried to tell me that I was responsible for her children's empty stomachs when I wouldn't give her the loan amount she wanted. I see this kind of stuff so often. My job depresses me so much. TLDR. Woman has gambling addiction. Spends rent, food bill, money on slot machines. Does not see anything wrong with it. About a year ago I was waiting for a train and there was a bit of commotion around the train station. A police car was parked on one side and someone was talking about how there was a girl on the tracks. When I was going up the stairs to get to my train, 2 police officers were dragging a girl that looked to be about 15, right past me. The way she cried was almost inhuman, not so much crying as screaming incoherently. She was dressed in a bright pink jacket, and one of the officers tried to make some small talk to make her calm down. I heard him something along the lines of, "What a nice jacket you have." She stopped screaming and crying just enough to reply. Her answer still haunts me today. "I wanted my parents to know who it was." That's freaking it. I'm out of here. My mom runs the after-school program at her school for 3 to 6 year olds. There was a mom of a 3-year-old little boy who always came to pick him up at 5:59 p.m., 1 minute before after-care ends, and she would ignore him completely, stare at her phone, and then bark orders at him if he wasn't moving quick enough. One day he made some coloring or artwork thing and wanted to show it to her. She snatched it out of his hands, crumpled up the paper, and said, "Do you think I need to be bothered with this right now?" My mom ended up talking to the principal and having the school social worker meet with the mom about appropriate behavior on school property, but I still want to clock that lady. Walking by a child in what looks like an older sister, aunt or whatever with my Spider-Man shirt. A kid, cool. I love Spider-Man. Me, awesome. Me too. Continues walking but a little off in the distance. Older sister, why do you like him so much? Kid, I pretend that he's my dad and we beat up bad guys instead of beating up mommy. Me. There was this time when I was about 6. It was right after my father had killed himself. It was my mom's birthday, and she got fired from her job for stealing milk. That woman has never stolen anything in her life. She locked herself in the bathroom and I could hear her sob through the night, my aunt feeding us. Years later, she found out it was a mistake. That memory will always stick with me. I was in the queue once at a post office, over in the UK that happened to be in a WH Smith's, a stationery book gift store, and there was a lad about 10 years old ahead of me in the queue with his parents. He was dressed in a tracksuit, as was both his parents. Nothing wrong with a tracksuit, but it's almost become a uniform synonymous with chads or, to put it bluntly, undesirables. Anyways, he was looking through some books that were on a shelf and he picked one up and went over to his mother and told her that it was a book from a series they had been talking about in school and he begged her to have it. She completely ignored him and so he turned to his dad, who clouted him over the head and told him books are for idiots. What's the point buying a book because once you've read it, it's done, he said. The kid then put it back on the shelf. I hasten to add the book cost £1.50. It was only about 10 pages long. I wanted to give the lad money for it, but I was actually scared in case it prompted either one of the parents to start on me. I was behind them in the queue for about 20 minutes and listened to them talking about fighting, getting drunk, shoplifting, and the whole time the kid was just stood there looking miserable. He was wearing a gold chain and a sovereign ring, and I thought, this kid has no chance. I wanted to pause the world and give him a cuddle. Books were for idiots. Makes perfect sense. I was walking home from the store, didn't have a car at the time, about 5 years ago. This little boy who was probably around 4 or 5 and his mother were walking hand in hand somewhere, presumably to the park that was nearby. They aren't saying much, just talking about the trees and gardens outside people's houses. Things get quiet for a moment and then the kid drops a bomb. Mommy, why did daddy die? He didn't say it in a sad tone, but almost curious. The woman gets this really dejected look on her face, starts to cry, and she sort of picks up speed. It wasn't that she was deliberately trying to ignore his question. I just think she didn't have the words to explain to him. I thought about it for the rest of the way home. Gave my dad a hug that night. My sister's husband died very unexpectedly last week. I attended the funeral, where my 3-year-old nephew was as well. While playing slides on the projector during the silence, his son looks up and says, "That's daddy. He'll be home soon to play with me." I was able to keep my composure until I heard that. My finances family is a bunch of alcoholics who drive all freaking drunk and are awful parents. I always remember the one kid walking around pouring out his dad's glass BC. He didn't want him driving drunk again. Apparently it's considered bitchy to call them out on their drinking and driving, but they do it every holiday. There's a sort of hotline you can call when you can't call people out on this sort of thing. 911. I work in a castle that holds medieval banquets, one side of which is that we give out free wine. It's 2.5 hours long, so if you try, you've got enough time to get pretty s-faced. One day, the banquet was finishing, and we were saying goodbye to the guests. This one woman, she was fairly trolleyed, knocking into the walls, knocking crap off of them, insulting me, my manager, and her manager who was up visiting. Her husband was out in the smoking area outside, ignoring the situation, apart from sending his probably 8-year-old son in to try and get her out of the building. "Come on mom, time to go. Dad says we have to leave now. The castle is closing," etc. I could hear in his voice that he'd seen this behavior repeatedly. It was pleading and sad, but resigned at the same time. So we got her out the door. Myself and my colleagues went to change out of costume and collected our tips. Maybe 5 minutes later, I left by the same door and headed to the car. I found the woman a few yards off the gravel path, butt over tit in a large patch of briars. She'd gone to look at the view of the bay, the castles beside the sea, slipped and fallen completely into the thorns, covered in blood from 100 tiny cuts. The son was bleating like Simba trying to wake up Mufasa after the stampede. "Come on mom, you can do it. Just try to stand up. I know you can mom. Please, please, just try mom." I don't know how he held it together. There were tears in his voice, if not in his eyes. And the motherfucking dad? He was down at the road at the end of the path, maybe 60 yards away, leaning on a wall, smoking a cigarette, without a care in the world. I walked down to him and hissed at him to go and get his car and drive it to the foot of the path, as his wife was incapable of walking to the car park. He was as aloof as motherfucking Viserys Targaryen and nonchalantly sauntered off to the car park. Me and 2 other staff members managed to get her upright, and I cleaned up her cuts with a med kit from work. She was out of her mind by this point, laughing and gurgling and wiping her freaking blood over us, and her kid embarrassed and ashamed and crying nearly. God, I simultaneously so sad and angry driving home after work that night. TLDR. If you know your wife is an alco, don't bring her and your kid to an all-you-can-drink buffet. Nothing is more embarrassing or heart-wrenching than watching your parent be in that state. I know how that kid felt. I have a very good friend who is a single mom. She's basically written off the father of her son, who knocked her up and basically has seen the kid once since he was born. She really didn't want this guy in her life anyway, and released him from having to pay child support in exchange of sole custody of the boy. When he was about 10 years old, we were all together in my car and he was sitting in the back seat. For whatever reason, his mother and I were talking about things we were planning to do that summer, and I told her that from the time I was 10 until well into high school, I would go fishing with my dad and grandfather on the beach near Big Sur where I grew up. I said that those were some of my fondest memories of my grandfather and dad, just being guys out on the shore, fishing and listening to the radio. Looking in the rearview mirror, I could see tears welling up in her son's eyes. When I asked him if everything was okay, he didn't answer and just looked away. His mom quietly told me that his biological dad had told him that he would take him fishing the last time they talked on the phone. She said that was 3 years ago and he hasn't heard from him since. No birthday cards, no phone calls, just gone out of their lives. So I told him, hey, I can take you fishing. I still have the rod I used when I was your age, and I can get my dad's fishing pole the next time I go home to visit my parents. Does that sound like a good idea? He looked so happy to hear that and then said something to his mom that just tore my heart in two. He said, "Mom, I'll probably never see my real dad ever again, but now I don't want to." He pointed to me and said, "Can he be my dad from now on? We've gone fishing every summer since then for the last 3 years. Not only that, I've helped him with his homework, school projects, and basically been a role model for him ever since." Yesterday, as we were driving around in my car, he saw some of his friends walking on the sidewalk going our direction. He slowly ducked into his seat. I asked what he was doing and he said, "Dude, I can't be seen having my dad drive me around. That's just not cool. I've never been prouder of my adopted son, doing exactly what I would have done when I was 14. This was one of the first ones that made me smile. You, sir, are awesome." Internet handshake and slap on the back. About half a dozen times over the last few years I have received a phone call first thing on a Saturday or Sunday morning from a kid. The kid is often crying and always asks, "Mom, when are you coming home?" It breaks my heart every time I have to tell that kid he has the wrong number. It would be a lot easier for both of you if you just went home already. My sister had to get surgery to remove a rather large portion of her brain about 6 years ago. She's been recovering very well, but obviously she still has issues. Very limited usage of her left side, trouble socializing, and academics are very difficult for her. As she's gotten older, she's become more aware of her situation. The other day I heard her ask our mom, "Why did this have to happen to me? I can't do anything. I just want to be normal. Will I never get better?" Just breaks my heart. She's been such a fighter for so many years and lately she's just given up hope. As a swim coach I overheard different groups of kids discussing their parents' divorces. Those were never easy to hear. My mom cheated on my dad and took his house and half of his money, but I guess that can be said of a lot of people. I didn't overhear this, but it seems similar. When I was a child my brother used to kick the crap out of me every day when my parents weren't home. It wasn't just fighting, it was torture. He used to tie me up, shoot me with BB guns, whip me with tea towels, elastic bands. Have huge elastic band phobia these days. Heating up teaspoons on cooker and putting them on my legs, etc. Not nice. Especially seeing as I am a girl 3 years his junior. One day my mum was out for a rare night out playing darts and my dad was supposed to stay home with us. I think I was about 9 or 10. He is an alcoholic so nothing will stand in his way of going to the pub, which was right at the bottom of my road so he wasn't far away. I think he thought that made it okay. Well, my brother had been hinting at what he was going to do when my dad went out. Sitting in the living room he had a BB gun on his lap covered by a magazine which he kept showing me subtly. Needless to say I was terrified. I begged my dad not to go out, crying and pleading. I never used to grass on my brother, no matter what he did. But I was so scared that I was crying and crying asking my dad to stay home just this once. He knew what was up, but he ignored it and went out anyway. I sat at his bedroom window and watched him leave. My neighbor saw me and told me years later it was the saddest thing she had seen because I was obviously so scared. Needless to say, I was terrorized as expected. Dang, that's fricked up. I am a bigger brother and it sickens me that somebody would abuse this power. I'm 30 now and my brother is 24. To this day my worst nightmare is something happening to him and I cannot prevent it. I teared up. Sorry, your brother is in butthole. I was in Walgreens, and I was browsing around and I could hear a child crying a couple rows over. I tried to blow it off. Children are always crying in stores. The child keeps crying. I hear him say, "I love you. Why won't you say it back?" And he starts to cry harder. The woman gets mad and yells at him to shut up. I'm crying thinking about it. I cashier at a grocery store. Guy comes in with 2 cartfuls of just every kind of junk food you can imagine. Everything is microwavable, and there's not a vegetable or fruit to be seen. It's all utter crap, and $400 worth of it, too. The guy has his 5 children with him, probably about 2 years apart each. The eldest is 10, and he's helping by pushing the other cart. They pull into my register and start unloading. All the while, the 10-year-old boy and 8-year-old girl are talking to their dad. They are trying to keep their voices down, but I can hear them saying, "Dad, this isn't good food. We need good food and this will be all of our money." The dad shushes them and tells them he knows what he's doing and it's all fine. They pay with food stamps, and I can see on the computer that is all of their money for the month. Gone in one order. The 10-year-old is on the verge of tears while he's pushing the cart, telling his dad that none of this will last them and now they don't have any more money. I was at the toy store one Christmas buying presents for my family with my friends. I was at small boys toy section and was looking at some toy soldiers for my cousin. I hear a young mother and her son talking quietly as they walked slowly by, looking at everything. I heard the son say, "Look mammy, that man, 16-year-old me, is buying presents. Can we buy some too?" And the mother replies softly, with a tear at her eye, "No, sorry Aiden. We need money for food." The kid didn't even seem disappointed, probably so used to not getting anything. They just carried on walking. I was so upset I immediately checked out and caught up with them and gave the little boy the toy soldiers. He was so happy. I thought the mother would say no, as they usually do in these types of situations, but she saw how happy her boy was. She just said thank you, with tears of joy this time. Yeah, I told you all about something good I did. I'm a smug bastard. But I couldn't go home knowing that kid had nothing. So shoot me. TL. DR. Boy asks for a toy for Christmas. His mom says no because they need money for food. The kid isn't even upset. I worked in a cancer hospital for an external company that made and delivered chemotherapy. I used to take drugs to all the different wards including the kids ward. There was this kid, about 10/11, in there that used to play pool all day every day. He used to challenge the other kids to games, teaching them how to play and then letting them win if it was their first go. I used to go to that ward about 3 times a week and he was always there doing the same routine. After my 3rd week into working there, he invited me to play a game. I told him I would come back at lunch and I did, and we played a few games. I kept going back once a week to play and he was always waiting for me with a cue in his hand. He always beat me. I was terrible. I kept up this routine for a few months while working there and then I had to leave and find a different job. I was on a temporary contract. I told him and he asked me if I knew anybody else he could play with. I told him that he had plenty of friends here and he accepted that answer. I went back a month later to cover for someone on leave and I went down to the children's ward. There was no kid, no queue, not even a pool table. There was however a plaque on the wall dedicated to the best pool player I had ever seen. You son of a b. Actually crying at work now. So sad. I heard a girl talking on the phone to her, I assume, boyfriend. She was having some sort of mental breakdown. Apparently she was pregnant, but didn't feel like she was meant to have the baby, because years earlier, her parents made her have an abortion and it traumatized her significantly. She then said she miscarried between the abortion and her current pregnancy, and knew it would happen again. She was being punished for having an abortion. I heard this all at my workplace. I was standing on the corner, waiting to clock in. Pretty much ruined my day. The parents ought to be punished for putting their own daughter through a trauma like an abortion. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.